So here we have the water cycle, which most of you are probably somewhat familiar with from previous years in science. Some things to note about the water cycle are that the energy that is used to drive this cycle is from the sun. So whatever energy the sun produces is what allows water to move in this cyclic motion. Another thing to notice is that the water cycle is incorporated into each of the spheres. So obviously the hydrosphere, when we see the liquid water that's on the planet, then we also have our water that's in the atmosphere as water vapor and condensation. Water falling as precipitation, still kind of in the atmosphere crossing over to the hydrosphere, and then water that infiltrates the ground and also is going to weather away Earth's surface would be an interaction between the hydrosphere and the geosphere. So all spheres are incorporated with the water cycle. Some other key information to note, though there are a lot of words on this diagram, most important would be to know about evaporation, condensation, precipitation, because this is how water is going to cycle between surface, atmosphere, and then back to surface again. Evaporation being the process by which we turn liquid water into water vapor by adding energy from the sun. Once that water vapor is a part of the atmosphere, it's going to move up in the atmosphere until it condenses. So as we cool air, it can no longer hold the same amount of water that it could when it was warm air and there was more space between the molecules. So once we're in the atmosphere and it cools, it's going to condense and that will form clouds. And then the water droplets that are within the clouds will become friends and they'll cling together and eventually they'll become heavy enough to fall as precipitation. Once we have precipitation, we can either have runoff with water that flows on the surface and is not absorbed by the surface but instead travels downstream. Water that is absorbed by the surface and infiltrates into the groundwater system. Or we can have water that's taken in by plants, flora and fauna. And finally, some might be evaporated right away, and that could be fog, or some might eventually become frozen as snow and ice if it were to fall as that type of precipitation. So that's the basics of the water cycle. You should also note that the biosphere is involved in the water cycle as well, because plants are going to take in water as they grow and as they go through photosynthesis. And the process of photosynthesis, they're also going to be releasing some water through their leaves, and that process would be transpiration or evapotranspiration. And that's a little bit more complex of a topic, but just know that plants can take in water and they can also release it. Okay, and then the other words that we see on this slide would be sublimation and desublimation or deposition. I wouldn't worry too much about this right now, but it's an interesting concept where we move from a solid directly to a gas or a gas directly to a solid, so skipping that liquid phase altogether. And we see this happen sometimes in rare instances with ice on Earth's surface. All right, so just remember that the water cycle is going to affect all of the spheres. It's going to move through the different spheres using energy from the sun. And you should have an idea about some of the more prominent terms: evaporation, condensation, precipitation, infiltration, and runoff.